Good afternoon, members. As it's 2 o'clock, this is the Accounts and Audit meeting of Monday, 13th of April, and as it's 2 o'clock, let's get the meeting underway. From the standard notices, there are no fire alarms scheduled for this afternoon. Therefore, if the fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately. Fire exits are located at the rear and side of this room, down the stairs, and meet in the War Memorial Park. Please note that this meeting is being webcast live on the internet, confirmed, and would all members please switch their phones off or turn them to silent. Thank you. Okay. So, first item on agenda, apologies for absence and substitutions. I have apologies from Councillor Parker and Councillor Leake, and Councillor Miller is sitting in for Councillor Marks. No others, I think. Yep. Okay. Declarations of interest. Any declarations of interest? No. And urgent matters. There are no urgent matters that have been brought to attention. None to bring to the table. Okay. So moving on. Minutes of the committee meeting held on the 2nd of February, which is paper A. If there are no comments or requirements to discuss it, then we'll move on to signing those at the end of this meeting. Okay? Thank you. So, item 5 on the agenda, which is going to be taken with Catriona Herbert. Yes? Who is use of Regulation Investigatory Powers Act of 2000. Catriona's local government and litigation team leader, who's sitting in for Jackie Tatum.
Thank you, Chair. Just a very brief update to members on the use of the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act. So further to your meeting of 2nd February, this table sets out in short order the fact that there have been no RIPA authorisations granted to 31st March 2015, nor any joint operations with any other local authorities. Members had asked for information about the viewing of any social networking sites in regard to investigations underway across the council. There's been 2 instances of that reported through to Jackie Tatum. Thank you.
Thank you, Catriona. Councillor Pearce.
Sorry, can you be a bit more specific about the 2 issues of social media use?
Thank you, Chair. I'll take those because they're both uses within my team. I can give you the sites that we used if you wish, and that was Twitter and Facebook, which were part of ongoing investigations that my team are doing.
Yes, Councillor.
Your team is conducting an investigation on those 2 particular sites. At what stage do you make an assessment whether that is transferred to the police or not?
Thank you. We have if it's a housing benefit fraud or a benefit fraud, we have the authority with my team to actually prosecute ourselves, so we don't need to refer to the police. If it's for a staff investigation, then that would follow our staff disciplinary process, but if there is a need to refer to the police, then obviously we would do so, but that would be a decision taken probably towards the end of the investigation.
Sorry, did you say that you any other questions? Okay, requirement is to note the information as we required. So noted. Thank you very much. Yes, indeed, Catriona. Thank you. So, next item on agenda, item 6, protecting the public purse, anti-fraud policy, and Paul Gundry will take this one.
Thank you, Chair. I bring to the committee the anti-fraud policy for you to approve. It's effectively the policy that identifies the roles and responsibilities of groups of individuals in our fight against fraud, protecting the public purse, which you will find on page 18 of 50, which is a tabular format for you. And I've also added the definition of fraud, which could be found on page 16 and 17 of 50 for you to view. I won't say any more than that. I'll just pass over for questions.
Councillor Keating.
Thank you, Chair. My issue relates to item 4.1.2 on page 13 of 50. And it obviously relates to the definition of fraud. I have some difficulty in accepting the phraseology, as I understand it, by the way, is that fraud is a type of criminal activity. Now, there are various forms of fraud, as we will all know. Many, and I'm not making a political point here, many MPs committed fraud on their expenses in the House of Commons over the last Parliament, or perhaps even before that. Most of them were not accused of criminal acts. Some of them were, and some of them even went to jail. But most of them were not accused of criminal acts. So, to say initially that fraud is a criminal activity, defined as an abusive position. Now, there are various forms of abusive position which do not necessarily meet the criteria for a criminal act. For example, if one abused one's position as a manager and recruited improperly, recruited to a job improperly, or found good reasons to promote someone against their eligibility criteria. It would be an abusive position without a doubt, and it would certainly be an employee abuse, employee abuse in relation to subordinates, but it's not necessarily, in my understanding, a criminal act. So to conflate criminal act with abusive position, I believe is too strong a direct connection. So I would like to see that paragraph transposed so that the first sentence would read, which is the last one, put simply, fraud is an act of deception intended, right? So I think that would be an accurate description, but I still would have difficulty with the phraseology, fraud is a type of criminal activity defined as an abusive position. Because I think you can abuse a position without being criminal.
Yeah, that's necessarily.
Thanks. That's my point. I don't have any legal training, I hasten to add, but this kind of thing is very important in my view in an organisation that employs 500 people. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just for information, I did take that definition from the Seared Fraud Office, which is what SIPFA recommend we use as part of their code of practice. But obviously I want to have an agreed definition of fraud, and that's why I look to this committee to agree that definition. So if the committee wish to change it, then by all means do so.
Councillor Miller.
I go along with everything that Councillor Keating said, and I think he's hit the nail on the head, because policies are very difficult to be explicit and prescriptive for a particular organisation. That's what policies, at the level that you got it from the Criminal Fraud Office, would say, wouldn't they? I think it's the application of the policy within a certain organisation is probably what we want to look at here. And I think we all see fraud as deception in whatever terms for gain of whoever's committing the fraud, be it an individual or organisation. And I've got a feeling it's probably covered, but wordsmithing policy statements, I think, I'm like you, I'm not a lawyer. I think we're treading into a little bit dangerous waters here. Sorry? Oh, like you, I'm not, yeah, okay. It's the pills. It's open to interpretation, and I think as long as we have an open mind, I think that's the secret in all this. And yes, we see the contradictions that are out in the big wide world, where we might consider, yes, that's fraud, criminal activity. Fraud we could see as, there are grey areas, let's put it that way. It's hard to resolve and be prescriptive in these kind of things, and I think as long as we are case by case, that comes up in this case, we identified as fraud, and we can look at it in those terms. You can't really put that into a policy. That's the problem. Anyway, that's my comment. What would you say to it?
Thank you, Chair. What I would do, as we do on a case-by-case basis, we would look at it, say, now, is that a breach of a staff policy, where, as the example that Mr. Councillor Keating used, could be seen as a breach of staff policy, which would be dealt through the council's disciplinary process, rather than taking it down the fraud route. So hopefully that would give you a bit more comfort.
Councillor Keating.
May I make a suggestion? To alter the first sentence in the following way, saying most fraud is a type of criminal activity, i.e. inserting an element of doubt, right? Most fraud is a criminal activity, full stop. It could include, or can include, or should include, whatever you want to say, it can include the abuse of position, of false misrepresentation, or prejudicing rights. So you would separate the two sentences, the one sentence, into two parts. Most fraud is criminal activity, and abuse of position may well be. If you see what I mean? So you don't say fraud is criminal, full stop, especially connecting that to abuse. That's my suggestion.
Before dealing with that suggestion, Councillor Pearce, you want to...
Thank you, Chair. I suppose it's the HR in me, really. I think it's slightly different from the other points that have been raised. I think you should have the word deliberate in front of the word deception. I know it's unlikely that somebody might not deliberately deceive, but it's a possibility. That's all.
Any other comments at all at this stage? No? Okay. So basically we can conduct the report and we can make these changes, and you'll issue the revised policy with that in mind. No, okay, sorry, Councillor Tilbury.
Just the point I would make, it's very much aimed at sort of how we deal with this internal fraud, really, where it talks about an anti-fraud policy. Well, what about fraud against us by, say, a member of the public? I mean, I assume, if we were aware of that benefit fraud, we would do that anyway, but it doesn't seem to be included in the policy that if that we would actually take that sort of action there. It seems to be very much aimed at sort of internal fraud, I mean, which will obviously do wonders to improve our role with our standing with the public. But I think that's the point. It's about fraud in the whole, isn't it? It's against us, and obviously to prevent it internally. There is it. Do you think it should be included in here, or is it really just covered in other areas anyway? I think that's what I'm getting at.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it covers all fraud. So, for example, on page 19 of 50, under the roles and responsibilities, we've got contractors and suppliers. So that will cover the procurement side of things. As far as benefit fraud is concerned, that's something that was raised back in my previous paper in November, and the training we did, that's now being passed to the DWP from the 1st of May. So again, us as an authority have not got we cannot investigate benefit fraud. We can only assist DWP by providing them information. So it is there to cover all types of fraud, not just internal.
Okay, fine, we'll issue the policy as indicated. Moving on to next item on the agenda, internal audit plan. Again, Paul.
Thank you, Chair. I do this every year. I bring to the committee the internal audit plan, which is the work that my team will do for this financial year, 2015-16, as well as the internal audit charter for approval. I'll take the charter first, which is on page 24 to 31 of 50. That's been reviewed, and there's the only change to that charter as opposed to the one that was approved by this committee this time last year, is changing the role of Audit, Governance and Accounts Committee to Audit and Accounts Committee. I didn't see their need to make any other changes. So should I take questions on that one first before I take to the audit plan?
Councillor Pearce.
Thank you, Chair. On the first paragraph, the question I've written on the side is what's in place to assure us that there is a proper separation between internal audit and the rest of the organisation's operations, and in particular, who do you report to in the event? Well, in any case, I'm hoping you're going to say the Chief Executive, but I suspect you might not.
Thank you, Chair. I have a day-to-day line manager responsibility to Chief Financial Officer Kevin, but I also have a direct line straight into the Chief Exec. So any concerns I do have, I can take straight to the Chief Executive. And again, I have a reporting line straight into Audit Committee. So my reports come to you from me. They're not vetted by Kevin, Chief Exec, or anybody else. So hopefully you've got that assurances there.
And the separation, how you keep separate?
Internal audit not part of any processes. The closest we probably would get to that would be to provide risk management advice and maintain the risk register. But that's there just to ensure that those risks are being dealt with on a day-to-day basis, and it's in the domain of senior management. But again, my team are not involved in any processes.
I'm not quite sure whether this is an appropriate question or not, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What about personal relationships within audit and other members of staff?
There are personal relationships within internal audit and other members of staff, and I will give you the example. One is myself. My wife works for the council. It is a declared interest to my manager, and I'm not involved in any of the audit within the area that she works, so I don't have any personal input into that area.
Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Chair. Paul, you did mention that you have a direct line to the Chief Executive. Para 335, I know this was written before he actually took post, but can we reflect that he has been consulted over this and not just the interim Chief Executive? 335, page 23 of 50, top of the page.
I got you.
I haven't consulted with him in the detail of my audit plan, but I did speak to him this morning just to inform him that I was bringing this report today, and that once it's approved, again, it's unfortunate timings from when the Chief Exec started, I will be having a meeting with him just to discuss what's been approved and to identify if there are any other areas that he wants me to add to the audit plan. And if he does ask me to add something to the plan, I will bring that to the committee as an amendment to the audit plan.
Councillor Keating.
This is me being ultra cautious. I have questions on the second part of this paper, i.e. the audit plan, but I don't want to approve this one if I'm then told, by the way, you've already approved it. So with the reservation that I've got questions about the plan, I would have no difficulty with this. Thank you.
Councillor Pearce.
My question is about the plan itself. Well, hang on. The first is a general question, but the bit starts on page 32. It's the plan itself. The first question is about cash. I couldn't see in here any reference to spot checks for areas where there is cash money flowing around. That's the first question.
Thank you, Chair. We have got the income collection audit, which is listed on core audits on page 33. They'll be covered in that area there.
you've put it in the plan, so everybody knows you're going to do that audit. No cash spot checks. I used to do them in shops regularly.
They can see that we're going to do that audit, 'cause we do that audit each year, but if we are to do a spot check, they don't know when we're going to do it, so it's an unannounced cashing up.
Just a note of levity, I noticed the 33/50, second item under other key audits. I shouldn't really laugh, but is this checking that those who are supposed to have been buried are actually buried?
It is indeed. We check the records. We even get the stick out to push it in the ground to see how far down the box is. We don't want any joking. No, we do check the records to ensure that the plots are assigned to the right person, etc., etc.
Yeah.
We do it at midnight.
Just as a, I mean, is that completely okay? Because I know of an issue in my own village where somebody went and a funeral director went and buried some ashes without telling us. There's certain paperwork I know of, but it was the funeral director and the Roman Catholic priest went and just buried this.
Well, once we do the audit, which will be this financial year, that report will obviously be coming to yourselves with the conclusions of what we find.
Any other questions at all for Paul? Do you have any questions on the plan side, Councillor Keating?
Yes.
Yeah. Or do you want to deal with that first separately?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, it's just to check. So we're happy to move on from the charter. Okay, so if I just quickly introduce the audit plan, I know I've already taken a couple of questions on it. The plan is the schedule of works that my team will do throughout the year, and again, you'll know we do bring progress reports to the committee on the work that we do, so you can see how what we found and that those issues have been remedied. I'd just like to bring to your attention that we will again be doing the Hearts core audit work like we did last year, which I've made reference to on
£24,000
24. Yes, so page 23 of 50, paragraph 341. That'll bring £24,500 to the council. So questions?
Any questions at all on the plan? Councillor Keating.
Thank you, Chair. I'm always keen to improve things. I'm not here, in my view, to criticise for the sake of it, and I regularly do not do that. But it seemed to me that when I looked at page 31, appendix something or other, it's been punched out. Yeah, Princess B. It seemed to me that in reading this whole page and looking at it, looking down on it, the draft report, the draft audit report, is issued to the manager. Presumably we're talking about the manager of the operations that you have just audited. Then that draft report, then it goes to the head of service. And then it goes to a final report. Now, is that a final report as we would read it? That's question number one.
Thank you, Chair. We issued draft report to the manager because we want to ensure that it's factually correct in terms of the processes that we've recorded, and then yet they are aware of the issues that have been identified. Once we're happy that we've captured the processes correctly, we do issue the draft report to the head of service because we expect them to answer, give assurances or further recommendations, and we do factor their comments into the report, which then becomes a final report, and the final report this committee receives executive summary of.
The reason I ask is that we regularly get reports. Now, we only currently get reports that are significant or substantial. In other words, they're already letting the council, the actions or lack of actions, or leaving the council vulnerable. That's all I need to say. Yeah. And anything that's leaving the council vulnerable, when it gets to us, it's been through this mechanism, and we're regularly told, "Oh, we haven't got round to that yet." Now, I find that bordering on the unacceptable. Anything that leaves this council vulnerable, it's a reputational issue, isn't it? And this council has a good reputation, and we have good council officers. So I would like to see that process truncated and more emphasis given to ensuring that the vulnerabilities are removed or eliminated. Now, I mean, that's like asking every manager to be perfect, and no one is. No one is. But I'm sure you got the message.
Thank you, Chair. Just to come back on that one, if that's okay. We have worked really hard with managers, and I'm sure the committee will know that if you look at that list of recommendations or outstanding that you receive on that periodic basis, it is a hell of a lot shorter than it used to be. So that's, from my point of view as internal audit manager, I'm happy with. But I do take on board the issues. If you identify a fundamental issue, I'd rather it was dealt with yesterday. But again, I know the committee has acknowledged the staffing issues in previous committees, and again, it's a manager's choice to either implement that recommendation immediately or risk take the opportunity to attend audit committee if you call them to question why they haven't dealt with the recommendation. So it is a very difficult balancing act. But again, I'm grateful for that comment, because we do use that way to the committee to have these recommendations implemented.
Could I just emphasise the point, boy? If I was running an organisation, or a part of an organisation here, and somebody came and told me with evidence that there is a fundamental issue, I wouldn't be waiting for next week. I wouldn't be reporting it till next week. I'd be working on it immediately. And that's what ought to happen, isn't it?
I agree.
Thank you.
Councillor Miller.
On exactly this point, I probably said it before, but I come from a project management background. Anything that the kind of situation you've identified, Councillor Keating, Paul, I would instantly think that that is a risk. That's what goes into the risk register. Now, the way I used to have to process these things, as the holder of the risk register, responsible for it, is that you immediately flag this up to the particular area and say, hey, here's a risk. How do we mitigate the risk? And this is what it's all about. I don't know how practical it is for those kind of items, as Councillor Keating suggested, could be brought before the committee. Because if the risk register is there, it's should be a straightforward document, because it identifies the risk. You look at the resources or whatever else you need to do to start to mitigate the risk. It's all timetabled in, and you know, in this particular case, the committee would know what action had been taken to resolve the problem. Now, that's the mechanistic way of doing it, and it might give, I think, all of us some confidence that these things have been identified for the council, because anything vulnerable to the council is a risk. And maybe that could be incorporated. Because do you do that anyway into the risk register?
We have a corporate risk register that identifies, I think it's 11 key risks to the authority, which is very high-level strategic risk. There are also, each service then holds its own, or each business unit, sorry, holds its own risk register, which is their data. So, for example, Kevin, he has a risk register for resources business unit, and that's where Kevin will review those risks at his one-to-ones with the relevant managers. For example, I have my one-to-one meeting where Kevin will review those risks. If the manager identifies a risk that needs to be put in their service risk register, that's obviously up for them to implement. But I would suggest that our recommendation follow-up process would probably deal with identifying those outstanding risks as opposed to the process you've just mentioned. And again, with those recommendations, the heads of service are aware of the outstanding recommendations. So again, it's not just with the manager, so it gives you opportunity for the head of service to deal with the relevant manager. What are you doing with this? And again, if it does remain outstanding, it comes to the audit committee. And as we know, the audit committee have the right to call any manager or head of service to the committee to account for their non-actions. So I'm comfortable with the risk recommendation follow-up process as opposed to dropping into service risk. But again, if a manager wishes to put it in their service risk, then by all means do so, because I'd work on the basis, hopefully get the recommendation implemented before you get it in the risk register. That would be ideal.
Yeah, thank you. It's just that the risk register should in itself be an auditable paper trail. It's a mechanism whereby it's in there. Because if you implement the recommendation before it goes in the risk register, it maybe is missed out of the risk register. That was my only comment. But thank you. I'm much more reassured now.
Any other questions or comments? Yes.
Quick, while you were talking on that, on the reporting and monitoring part, I noticed there's one of the G's has escaped the colour of the G's from Niagara on there. Yeah, yeah. Oh, you see it on there. Yeah, that's once you see it, it's obvious, isn't it? But yeah, that's it. Yeah, you go through it hundreds of times and you still miss them.
Okay. Any other final questions? Otherwise, we're required to approve the following: the audit charter and the audit annual audit plan. So yes, approved. Okay. Item 8, accounting policies and changing to the statement of accounts for 2014-15. Dean.
Thank you, Chair. This is paper E on page 34 of 50. It's a report of the accounting policies and changes to the statement of accounts for the 2014-15. It's an information-only report. We're not asking you to approve the accounting policies, but it does best practices that we give members an opportunity to see the accounting policies and comment on the accounting policies prior to actually seeing the draft statement of accounts, which will come to this committee in June. The policies that are set out in Appendix 1 are selected by the Chief Finance Officer. However, he has virtually no discretion in terms of what those policies should be. He does, however, choose which of the policies go in the statement of accounts based on whether they're material or applicable to this council. They're set out in the Code of Practice. It's quite onerous in terms of what's in there. Sometimes the accounting policies change because the code changes, so they may introduce new accounting standards which change the accounting policies. There's very little. The other part of the report deals with any changes to the Code of Practice that might impact on our statement of accounts. There is really only one major area that's changing in the code, and that's to do with the introduction of some new accounting standards to do with collaborative working, which means basically we're going to have to go and look at all of our collaborative working arrangements and make an assessment as to whether we feel we need to do group accounts for any of those working arrangements. It's going to be a lot of work to evidence to the auditors that we've done the work and looked at them all, but it's unlikely that they're going to change anything that's in the accounts. It's unlikely we're going to discover a new subsidiary or a new associate or anything that requires us to do group accounts. So if you've got any questions on it, it is quite dry, it is quite technical and quite complicated, and you will get a session on the statement of accounts prior to being required to approve the accounts in September. You'll get a session probably in June when we present the draft accounts, so which will go into a bit more detail about what some of these things mean. Thank you. I'll take questions.
Thank you. I'm assuming then that the session that we'll have will be a weak session to enable us to understand the complexities that you're referring to. And on the basis that we can't afford the expenses, we would have to do it here. But can I just help me to understand this? I don't mean the technical details. The principle. We currently have joint working arrangement on waste collection with Hart Borough Council. Now, that's been going on for a number of years, not a long years, but it's a well-established arrangement. Would that particular arrangement fall within the category of collaborative or group working? Would that fall into that category?
Absolutely everything that we do, working together with other organisations, falls under the heading of collaborative working. We then have to look at each of those arrangements and determine what type of arrangement it is. Is there a separate entity? Do we control that entity? You know, it's those sort of things that we were looking at. Where we're just simply working together, it usually falls outside of the scope of having to produce group accounts. It's you just account for your share of the costs involved or the income that's generated. So we have to make an assessment of all of those arrangements, including that particular one. That particular one is likely to fall out of the sort of, we have to go through a flow chart of questions to determine whether or not we have a subsidiary, an associate, just a joint working arrangement. So that one ends up as a joint working arrangement, so it's not doesn't impact on the accounts in the sense of we wouldn't have to bring in Hart's accounts in with ours or a separate entity's accounts in with ours.
If I may say, but if we're entering into a collaborative or a joint or a group arrangement, whatever, presumably we're the principal party in these cases, because we're not going to do a group account or a group of activity with Westminster City Council because they're too far away, or Hampshire County Council. But we do lots of things with Hampshire County Council, and Hampshire County Council itself, because it would be the biggest, most elaborative partner, may well have their own subsidiaries, and they do have some of these. So would you be effectively asking the county council, in this case, to confirm whether or not they have subsidiaries which impact on what they do for us, or to us, usually to us?
The process that we're going to go through to sort of evidence to the auditors that we've looked at this, we start with our partnership database. We do have a database that lists all of our partnership arrangements. So that could be like the leisure partnerships. It could be things where members sit on boards. There's all sorts of arrangements. So that's the sort of starting point. Obviously, officers in the council will know of other working arrangements, so we'll be out talking to them and asking them what type of arrangements we have with other organisations, because obviously sat in finance we're not party necessarily to all of these arrangements. So that's the starting point, and then we will literally take each one of those and go put them through this list of questions, you know, to determine. Most of them we're expecting this short answer to be no, it's just you working together with them. There are no assets or liabilities that need to be brought onto our balance sheet. There is no, you know, expenditure or income that's outside of the council's control that needs to be brought into it. So it's, you know, it's not going to be an easy process, but we will be doing it for everything, basically. Each year, yes.
Councillor Pearce.
It's actually on the next item, Chair. I've just made a little mistake. Apologies.
I think on the point Dean's just made, I mean, the obvious one I can think of is if we looked at the seven-way waste contract some years ago, whereas that would have been the joint one, so it would have been joint assets of trucks and such like. But the obvious joint one I can think of is Many Down, which is but we could have a joint partnership with Hampshire, of course, but also with a business partner potentially, and that's going to be quite interesting how that would work, isn't it? With a, you know, that's because there's an obvious joint asset, i.e. the land at this point in time, but you know, given the it's already complicated enough. This just sounds like a further headache than this. You know, as if it wasn't a difficult enough problem to deal with. But thank you.
Any other questions at all? Okay. That being said, we recommended that we note the report, and therefore it's noted. Okay. Next item, item 9, overview of municipal bond agency. Dean, again.
Sorry, this is paper F, page 44 of 50. It's a report about the municipal bond agency. You may recall at the last audit committee you requested that we brought a report to the committee on the municipal bond agency. It's a report for information. It sets out what the agency is, its aims and structure, which in essence it's a collective arrangement of local authorities coming together aimed at providing a source of funding primarily at rates that are cheaper than local authorities can borrow from the PWLB. There's 3 ways that we could become involved with the municipal bond agency. We could become shareholders, so we could invest, in its loosest sense, some money as a shareholder, buy equity in the agency itself, but that would be a relatively small amount of money that they, I think it's between 10 and 50,000. We could buy bonds that the agency issues. We don't have to be a shareholder to be able to do that. Any local authorities can do that, or anybody can buy the bonds actually, I think. Or we could we could go to them as a source of borrowing if we were looking to borrow as an alternative to the PWLB. So those are the 3 ways that we might get involved with the agency. So if you have any questions on the paper, I'll do my best to answer them.
Councillor Pearce.
Was semi-related, they're not directly, but it flashed up lender and borrower to me, and we are a lender as well, aren't we? And is there any charter for that? That's the first question. The second question is, to whom do we lend? And the third question is, out of those people, what rate of return are we getting for the money that we've lent?
Could you just repeat the first part of that question? Is there a charter?
Is there a charter as a There may not be, and it's not a big deal, but I believe there's a charter for borrowers. Is there a charter for lenders? And if I've got that wrong, that's fine. I'm happy to be wrong. But the second part was about to whom we lend and what rate of return we get.
I'll answer the second bit first, if I may. To whom we lend, that's all set out in our treasury management strategy, which is approved by this committee. And we bring regular monitoring reports on our position in terms of who we have money lent to and what sort of returns that we're getting on those. As to a charter, I'm not quite sure what you mean in the sense of...
Sorry, Chair. Does the information you give us tell us the rate of return to the people that borrow, like other councils?
Sorry, Chair. The strategy sets out who we can lend to, that we can lend to local authorities. And at the moment, there's probably 4 or 5 authorities that the council's currently invested in for a period up to 5 years maximum. And the maximum amount that we could invest with other councils, so lend to other councils, is 40 million, with a £5 million per council limit. So those are the limits that council have set for us to invest. in individual councils. In the reports that you get, it does give the return that the different classes of assets are doing, and the local authority ones that we did a couple of years ago, and I think we were getting about 2.25% in the fixed term lending that we did. But the rates generally for local authorities are above the gilt rate by, they're not massively above, but they're a bit above the gilt rate by 0.2, 0.4 above the gilt rate, depending on the period that you're prepared to go. So yes, we do report that back, and it appears as local authority lending. The other local authority lending that we've got were decisions taken a long while ago, and those are local authority bonds, and we do actually probably hold some of the few local authority bonds that are still out there in, I think, two or three authorities that mature in, I think, 2019. And again, we're getting returns quite high on those because they were bonds that were taken out 12, 15 years ago.
Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Chair. I'm afraid I got lost there because looking in the municipal bond agency, I didn't see anything that might affect us in lending. That's what threw me, because it says a shareholder, as a buyer of bonds, or as a borrower. The one thing about the report, let's park that, shall we? The one thing that I focused on here was the aims of and structure of the Municipal Bonds Agency in paragraph 5. The agency will be set up as an independent company owned by local government. Then we turn over to paragraph 5.11 on the following page. The LGA set up the UK Municipal Bonds Agency, trading as the local capital finance agency, and has appointed its chairman. Is this chicken and egg? I've got something further to this, but could that question be answered, please? I'm confused.
I probably should make members aware that I'm actually, or was, a member of the LGA project board that was involved in some of that work, not all of it, but in some of that work. But so I ought to know the answer to that question. But in terms of setting up the company, the company is set up with shareholders that are local authority shareholders. The initial company was set up with some funding from local authorities and some funding from the LGA, and the LGA had a majority shareholding at that point, and they have appointed the chair, and well, the shareholders have appointed the chairman of the new company, and then it now operates as a company with shareholder input into the AGM. So that's how it's been structured, but it's a company that is owned by its shareholders, and its shareholders are local authorities.
Thank you very much. I didn't understand that. The paragraph that worries me, and I noticed that this council was asked if they wanted to become a shareholder in that particular company, and they actually turned it down. In paragraph 7.2. Yes?
I think probably the question is, everybody was invited to be shareholders, and we haven't taken up the invitation yet, is probably the way to think of it.
Right, we haven't taken it up yet. Well, paragraph 6 answers that question for me, because it's under risks. I read that paragraph, and I don't want to touch this agency at the moment, especially with the volatile markets that are going around. It's quite rightly setting out 5 key risks, and you're talking about delving into the market, and that's where your risk is going to be. Local authorities, by definition, are very conservative with a small c in terms of what they do with their finance. And we've talked about this before elsewhere in the council, and yes, we've sort of gone into the market, but it tends to be gilts, I think, more than anything else. You know, fairly secure investment, okay, it gives a lower rate of return, but paragraph 6 is very valuable to me looking at this report. Noted it, yes, fine, but I think we'd better take a lot more attention to those various risks that are identified. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Tilbury.
Yeah, I mean, I think Paul sort of made the point, but I think what isn't clear, I think, from the report is I can see the advantage to lenders of, you know, basically sort of undercutting the Public Works loan board, because that's sort of been pushed up a bit like they did with the old council mortgage lending and things like that. But I can't see any advantage to anyone wanting to put that money into it, because normally, you know, the banks, buy cheap and sell expensive, isn't he? With a sort of 5% difference, you know. They're borrowing it at sort of base rate-ish and lending it to people at 6 or 7% or 20% if it's on the credit card, aren't they? But you can't see how you can make a lot of, you know, there's not the potential there for them to make money, to be able to pay a return to the people who are lending the money. And that's what I can't see how, I mean, obviously, there's got to be a return, or why would you invest in it? But, you know, there's got to be a differential there. So, I mean, but it does seem very small, doesn't it? I think
I do understand the point you make, that you've got to separate the agency and investment with the agency, i.e. buying the shares, with the actual activity that they are sort of administering. Because the activity they're administering is they get a load of authorities coming to them saying, we want to borrow some money, and we want to borrow it at less than the PWLB rates. They gather those together, and then they do a bond issue, one bond issuance for all of those authorities, and then they put those out in the market and people buy those bonds, or other authorities or any investors buy those bonds. Could be pension funds, could be anybody. So the borrowing and lending part of it is separate from the actual investment in the agency. So you know, you don't have to be involved with the agency in terms of being a shareholder to buy some of the bonds that they're issuing, and you can buy them in the secondary market as well, or to approach them and say, we want to borrow some money. You know, we're interested in some funding from you. So they are separate things, and basically what they're saying is the PWLB differential is 0.8% between the gilt over the gilt, and what they're saying is, can we not meet somewhere in the middle? So, you know, both sides win a little bit, but a little bit on a you know, 10 million, 20 million over 20 years can make a massive difference.
Yeah, just to add that from the investor, from the market, somebody who might buy those bonds, what they're getting is government-like security in local authorities for a rate that's above gilts, whatever that market rate turns out to be. But Transport for London and have issued bonds in the past, and they've traded 0.5, 0.6 above gilt. So you're getting an above gilt return for a government-like debt instrument. That's what it's in for. That's what's in it for the market generally.
Councillor Keating.
Perhaps I'm wrong, and I was once, but only when I thought it was wrong. My recollection is that the PWLB used to lend at a fixed rate. They would say, you want 2 million, it's at 2%, and that would be your fixed rate for the duration. Whereas this new arrangement is a floating rate, because it starts with gilt rate, which is not fixed, is it?
No, it's at the time that you purchase it. Basically, if you were to buy one of those bonds, the rate that you would get, or the yield that you'd be looking to get from that bond, would be fixed around whatever the current gilt rate was. So it is still fixed for the duration, for the whole duration, yeah.
Any other questions at all on? Okay, we required or requested or recommended that we note the report, so therefore it is so noted. Okay, that's it. Before you finish, just like to thank everybody. Sorry, Councillor Pearce.
Two things. I think in noting, I think we ought to note with thanks, because these things, you know, might be turgid to produce, and they have to suffer all sorts of odd questions. So just a small point. My second point is we haven't had the chair here for I know this is the last meeting, but it seems slightly unfair that you've had to chair this meeting for the majority of the year, and I wonder whether we could do anything about replacing the chair and backdating it. Well, the reality here is that there is significant work involved for any chair of a committee, and there is a payment, and I don't think it's fair that somebody else should be in receipt of the payment and not be doing the work. So I want to know whether we can oust him from a particular date, since he's not been here, and replace him with you. I think why can't we? Somebody tell me why we can't. I don't mind if we can't, but I want to know why.
The answer is very simple. the chairs of committees are appointed by full council and can only be removed by full council. Thank you.
Let me just make a comment. From my point of view, one thing I did want to say is it's been an interesting experience, and I thank the officers and the members for their tolerance in what has been difficult in terms of the committee chair, but also in terms of frankly, having to learn how to work with the committee as well. So I thank you all for your tolerance, and hopefully we can resolve this for the next council year. Thank you. Okay, sorry, formally close the meeting. It is 5 to 3. Thank you very much for your attention.